Hi, I'm Gary Bernklow. I'm the Senior Product Director at medaptus, and I focus mainly on our infusion product. And today we're going to be talking about our health check process for infusion services and how you might be missing some revenue with your infusion services and what we can do to find that revenue and make your workflow a little bit better. So first off, let's take a look at the complexity of outpatient infusion coding. What makes it so difficult? Well, first of all, unlike other services, as I already mentioned, infusion coding isn't a one service. Hey, we did a chest x-ray. That's, CPT code 71020 or whatever it may be. It's entirely based on the duration of the infused drug. So how long you infused it, right? That's what determines the codes that you use. Part of what determines the codes that you use. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is that there's a hierarchy of drug types. All drugs are broken down into essentially three types of drugs. There are chemotherapy drugs, therapeutic drugs, or hydrating drugs. And you have to know which type of drug you're infusing in order to pick the right code. There are very specific rules for overlapping time. If you're infusing two different drugs, one of them overlaps with another one, there's very specific rules behind that. If you have two drugs mixed in the same bag, there's also rules for that. So all of these things contribute to being a much more complex coding scenario than your typical pick a CPT code and it should match. And the last thing, there are always documentation issues. They may not be complete documentation in the patient's chart. So you may not have a stop time, for instance, or you may not have a start time, who knows, or there may be no times listed at all, simply a doctor's order saying, hey, do this for an hour and a half. So all of those things help contribute to the difficulty in correctly billing infusion services. You see this a lot in emergency departments and observation care departments. Hydration services are very common in the emergency department, and for the most part, a lot of emergency departments are just like, why bother? We're not even going to bother billing that. Not even going to track it. A big example that we see, and I talked a little bit about it already, is the no documented stop time in the chart. This most often occurs with hydration services in the emergency department. And remember, your emergency department is an outpatient clinic. It's an outpatient service. So any infusions you perform in there have to be billed using this specific logic, right? Same thing with an observation care department. So you'll see a lot of times whoever's responsible for documenting the infusion that was done in the ER, they won't put a stop time associated on that drug. You can still bill most therapeutic drugs and chemotherapy drugs without a stop time, but it's not as efficient and you don't get paid as much, right? Some other inefficient workflows that occur and contribute to having infusion services being billed incorrectly, having your nurses or your clinical staff trying to select the billing codes. Nurses are not coders. They don't want to be coders. They don't like coding. They just don't want anything to do with it. They want to deal with the patient stuff. They already have to document all of these things. Why now are you asking them to go in and try to figure out this crazy hierarchy of codes and selecting the right one? And oh, you picked the wrong initial one. We did an audit on a client that they were having the nurses put in all their documentation, pick the codes from a drop-down selector. They were an Epic system. They would have a little drop-down selector. The nurse would pick the code, and we'd go off to the billing department, and the coders would have to go into every single account and review it, and 80% of them were wrong, and they'd take every single one that was wrong, and they'd put it on an Excel spreadsheet, and then at the end of the month, they'd take the Excel spreadsheet to the nurses' meetings, and they'd say, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong. Quick look at some examples of what I'm talking about that we found in some of our audits. One of the big things that we see is, I think I've touched on it a little bit here, is using the order time to actually calculate the billing codes for the stop time. And if the order, here's a typical kind of order that you see, on a chart or in an organization. And this one is particular for cyclophosphamide, starting at, intravenous, administer over an hour and a half. You can actually calculate the billable codes based on that and a start time, right? You can say start at 10 and it says administer over an hour and a half. Now I can interpret that and say it ended at 11:30, from 10 to 11:30. and bill 1 unit of billable code, because again, 90 minutes is the cutoff there for this particular service. But if the actual duration on that is 92 minutes, like I said, that's another billable unit. And the difference is in the financial difference is pretty remarkable. Lastly, one of the big problems that we see is just kind of rounding the duration of infusion services. And what I mean by that is a patient going in to an infusion center, let's say, that is very experienced with this sort of thing, and the patient has 2 different infusions, and they both last about 15 minutes. We had one specific organization that actually told their nurses just round it down to the nearest 15 minutes. Well, again, the difference between a long infusion, which gets paid a lot of money, and a push infusion, which gets paid considerably less money, is 15 and 16 minutes. A 16-minute is a long infusion, and a 15-minute is a push. So if you're doing that consistently, for every single patient that comes in, that's a huge amount of revenue you're leaving on the table. Again, revenue that you deserve, that you've earned. So let's take a look at what the impact of that is on your revenue. First, we'll take a look at when we first started getting into this space. We had a really large cancer center. It's one of our clients with more than 150,000 infusions a year, all complex infusions, by the way, chemotherapy services. It was a cancer center. And the nurses were creating, recording start and stop times, and then they were responsible for creating the bills, also selecting the billing codes. And they were consistently, for the last however long they were billing them these way, probably 20 years, they were always rounding down to the nearest 15 minutes, always. So by changing that and accurately recording start and stop times, they actually made, within a year, $4.6 million just on those things. Look at the overall workflow and efficiency. For 60,000 encounters, an organization with 60,000 encounters, they're going to require a minimum of 4 coders. And that's if all of them are really good and super knowledgeable, right? And now, and when I say 4 coders, I mean full-time, just doing infusions. So if you don't have a dedicated infusion center, you're just kind of performing infusions in the ED or OBS or somewhere else in other departments, you're still going to have these 4 coders going through and looking at all these infusions. And you're still going to have missing documentation issues, right? If the coders are going through and correcting everything, they're probably still finding, hey, there's still stop times somewhere. And so you can throw staff at this and try to overcome these issues, but it's not really scalable. And if you want to be efficient at how you're handling your infusion services. So we calculated the average projected revenue improvement that can be realized by automating your outpatient infusion coding processes, and that comes out to 10%. What are the solutions for how do you fix these problems, right? And I want to get specifically into that. You can throw staffing at it. You can just throw resources at it and hope if you're going to do more infusions in the future, you can hire more coders to do it, because there is a limit to the number that they can do individually. And if they're coding directly from the documentation, pulling up your EMR and then typing in CPT codes to make sure the billing is correct, there's a limit to how many of those they can do during a day. But there is kind of one other alternative that you can go with, and that's what the product that we do provide, and this is just full automation. By full automation, I mean we pull the data, we do the codes, and we send the codes back. I mean, it's really that's the way it is. With absolutely no human intervention whatsoever. If you have documented start and stop times and event times in your charts, we can write a program that pulls that data out. So what we have to offer is kind of a 4-step infusion revenue health check. What we offer is kind of a 30-minute virtual, hey, tell us about your organization, how can we help, what are you looking for, and from that we can actually jump into your organization possibly providing us with some of this anonymized patient data and us running it through our system and seeing what codes get calculated. And then we can provide some data back to your organization on that. We would analyze and send you a couple of reports back showing your status on all these different measures, right? How many charges you might have missed, how many infusion services weren't charged. I'd like someone here to go home and be a hero, right? Be a hero in that organization and say, I've uncovered all these problems, let's fix them, and start bringing in more revenue and be successful because of it.